I'm going to do a little something different with you right now. First of all, I have your new American Education FM podcast image up on the screen. I think it's a wonderful image, by the way. The old schoolhouse with the steeple that's leaned over and it's all rotted out. I already know exactly where you're going to go with your conversations. It's so perfect.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Since I've been essentially homeschooling and sort of filling in part-time with my niece and nephew, sort of had a behind-the-scenes look as to what's really going on, in particular with their school and their teachers' instruction, or perhaps lack thereof. But I can tell you very quickly, the propaganda is very, very thick, and the lack of organization, in my opinion, is beyond evident.
So then let's talk about the propaganda. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you are noticing. Because the last time you were on, we were talking about the importance, and we've talked about this with Robin McCutcheon as well, Professor Robin McCutcheon, who I believe was one of the first guests you had on your new podcast, correct?
Correct, yes. She was on there for a nice, unfiltered, at least an hour and a half. And I had my dad on as well, and he was in higher education for 45 years. And again, the way his career ended was absolutely horrific. But yeah.
Well, I'm definitely going to subscribe to this podcast afterwards and take a listen, because it's going to it definitely satisfies one of those needs, those areas of information I love being in tune with. But I want you to start first by talking about what you have encountered with the material that has been sent home for homeschooling purposes. The last time we spoke, you mentioned how this was a great opportunity in this country, even though it's horrible what's being done on a state level to lock people down, to destroy private businesses, but maybe the silver lining we can take, since we're talking about silver linings a lot tonight, maybe the silver lining we can take away from that is the shakeup of a school system that was in desperate need of shaking up. And you were going to take on the challenge of homeschooling your niece and nephew. What have you been able to observe in the material that has been sent home for you to work with?
Well, let me give you some background. My nephew's in 4th grade and my niece is in 1st grade. And the two of them attend a rather large school district and well-to-do school district, so to speak, in central Ohio. It's not Columbus City Public Schools, but it's just outside of that. And the first full month, I would say at least the first 4 weeks, they were completely home 100% of the time, with them logging into Google Meets and meeting with their teachers and engaging in these calendars and basically just a giant list of electronic assignments that they have to do on a day in and day out basis, which actually didn't take them very long at all to do. So that was kind of the first thing that I noticed was the educators didn't seem to be utilizing the time the way that they could, even in an online environment. I thought that was a bit alarming, but fortunately I had countless supplemental things that I was doing with them, which certainly proved to be rather beneficial. I would say that the big thing, again, that I noticed, not just beyond the lack of organization, but it's the complete and utter submission that the school district seems to have regarding these online programs, because it's evident that they're using these same online programs within the classroom. So, for example, within the first 4 weeks, the first 2 weeks were again, the students just clicking on computers constantly, and me looking over their shoulder and seeing what they're clicking on and what they're doing, and then they'll just say, okay, I'm done. And they'll do this without even talking. So they're not really even saying anything. I mean, if they have a question, they'll ask me, I help them out, figure things out, and then they move on. But there's not a lot of talking going on. And that was one of the things that I noticed with my niece, because when I showed up, she was illiterate. I mean, she couldn't read. So these reading programs that they have, two in particular, which are called Lexia and Dreambox, these are considered, I would say, standard within the state of Ohio, in particular in the elementary level, on their Chromebooks. And so she's clicking on words, and she's hearing a computerized, word or a computerized person in her head through the headphones say what the word is, but she's not actually saying it. And so, I'm not a literacy expert, but I do know that if they don't say the words out loud, they're not going to learn how to read. So we had to break through that. And to be frank with her, I used the McGuffey readers. And within 2 weeks, she was reading on her own. She was spelling words correctly. I mean, she was having a hard time with 2 3-letter words. But now she's in the second McGuffey reader, the second reader. So she's read 2 already. She's in this one, and she's just cranking it out on her own, which is great.
Wow.
She's reading full-fledged short stories by herself. But, I mean, there was just nothing going on with these online programs.
And how old is she again? How old was she?
She just turned 7.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean it's just depressing. And again, you know, these are my observations. I'm not saying it's like this everywhere, but this is just what I've been able to see. I can basically just run through sort of a subject by subject thing here. One of the programs that they use, which I actually used back when I taught 6th grade, well over 11 years ago, is a program that their teachers have them on almost a daily basis, and it's called Brain Pop. Brain Pop is a computerized cartoon boy and a cartoon robot, and they go on different adventures, and they explain different subject matter to the students. But on this one particular episode that they had them watching, it was a cartoon girl wearing a blazer. She had the rainbow flag lapel pin on her lapel on her jacket, and she's talking to Dr. Fauci.
Oh.
On a cartoon television, and it's actually Fauci, and he's telling the students about the importance of mask wearing, social distancing, limiting the amount of people that they're around, even in school and within classroom settings. I mean, it's just the normalization of this chaos and this ridiculousness.
Wow.
And the thing, too, is as I'm watching this, again, no parents are in the room. So these kids are watching this, and they're just sort of absorbing it without any real direction and saying, all right, wait a minute, this isn't 100% appropriate. You know, maybe we shouldn't believe everything this guy says. You know, let's pump the brakes on this. So there was that with the Brain Pop program. I mentioned the Lexi and Dreambox thing again. Those 2 programs are also largely driven, much like a Mario Brothers video game, where they're earning tokens over the course of years of them being in front of these programs. So my niece will look at my nephew and go, I've got 13 tokens. And my nephew looks at my niece and goes, I've got 69,500 tokens. You know, just because he's older and he's been playing these online games for so long that their teachers are having them do. So again, I'm pretty old school when it comes to instruction, but when I see this kind of stuff, I just think to myself, no wonder kids play as many video games as they do. And then when a teacher says to the students, so what do you like doing in your spare time? The kid says, oh, I like playing video games. And 95% of the students in the class say, I like playing video games. It's being ingrained in them in their schoolwork. And it's awful. There's another program that my niece was using titled Keyboarding Without Tears. Now, you got to keep in mind that I taught her how to basically read, and now she can write. But this Keyboarding Without Tears is the official dumbing down of these students, because now she's having to go backwards. And what they have them doing on the computer is basically tracing out letters on the computer. And then they'll take electronic chopsticks, and the computer will say, make the letter K, and then they take the electronic chopsticks, and then they just build the letter K. So I'm saying to myself, again, she knows how to read. She knows how to write. Why is she doing this? Why are we playing matching games with electronic chopsticks? It just makes absolutely no sense to me. But again, I think that right there is the full definition of Common Core.
Oh, absolutely. So, and I was going to ask you about that in particular. What about as far as, I mean, I have seen the math, and this was weeks, this was years ago that I first came to the conclusion that many people come to the conclusion of, that we have seen basic math flipped upside down for no reason other than what it seems to me is that it will eliminate the parents being able to get involved with their children's education. That when you're taking, when you say, oh, you have 7 and you have 4, how do you make 10? And you tell the kids, well, you take 3 from the 4, you give it to the 10, and you throw the remaining 1 away. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? 7 and 4 is 11. I mean, things like that where they're bringing subjectivity in. They're trying to bring subjectivity into places where you would imagine you would have a backstop of hard objectivity with numbers. But what are you seeing with math?
I'm glad you asked. The math workbook, and again, you and I grew up with textbooks, and at the beginning of at the top of the page, I mean, it would be broken up by units and chapters and then subchapters. Most books operate that way. That's the other thing, too, by the way. They don't have books. I mean, these kids don't have textbooks. So what they have for math is they have something that's called Bridges in Mathematics. And this is Common Core without a doubt. And it's a workbook. And I actually have a sample question to read and see if you can just kind of get it right out of the gate. This is within their first unit. And my nephew reads the directions to me because he can't figure it out. And but he looks at the math problem that's below these ridiculous sort of word salad, I guess it would be, and he just does the math problem, and he gets it right because it just shows a basic math problem at the very bottom. But here's what the question reads, and I'll just let you know here. Okay, it's called multiplication fact strategies. And then it says that the subtitle below that is doubles plus 1 set facts. And then the question reads like this. It says, when one of the factors is 3, you can think about the doubles fact, and then add one more set of the number being doubled. For example, 6 times 3 is 6 doubled 12 plus one more set of 6. Now, if that's confusing to anybody, it should be. Part of it probably had to do with the way that I just read it, but all it's basically asking is, hey, kid, what's 6 times 3?
That's what I was wondering. That's what I was wondering what they were getting around to. Right.
That's all they could do. Instead, they eventually ask that question much later on, but then they have them fill out this box graph to sort of represent 18 different boxes and what the answer to 3 times 6 is. Instead of just asking them, what's 3 times 6? They have to have this long word salad convoluted question to finally arrive at some answer. So, again, that's just one example. But the workbooks that I have them working out of, which, again, I recommend, I purchased them on Amazon. They're called 180 Days of, and then you fill in the subject. Social studies, science, reading language arts, geography, civics, math. I did go back, though, and I ended up tossing the math one away, and I picked sort of an even more old-school math workbook. Again, it's got the words and definitions at the top. It shows lots of examples on how to do the problem, and then it just asks you to do the problem. I mean, there's no bullshit in the middle of it. There's no word salad. There's nothing like that. It's just straightforward. This is 4th grade math. This is 1st grade math. And they're both cruising through it, which is great. But the math part is without a doubt Common Core. And again, the part of Common Core, just to kind of wrap that up, is that it's really designed to create a compliant, confused adult.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose is to confuse the child while they're young, but it's also designed to keep them confused as they age.
That's, and this is the other thing. Now, you're talking about confusion as being ingrained into children and to turn them into frustrated, confused, detached adults, pretty much. And then, of course, just make that cycle repeat itself over and over again. But here's the other thing now, too. As far as the trauma programming, and maybe we can get back around to, I also want to ask you a little bit about your podcast and stuff. And I know it's a little bit of a shorter trip down the block with each other tonight, but I'm going to start you off with 2 headlines and a personal anecdote, okay? Here's the first one.
Do it.
Here's a headline from a day ago, okay? Elon Musk. I got a COVID test. I got COVID tested 4 times in one day. 2 came back negative. 2 came back positive. Okay? Here's the next one for you. Okay? Erykah Badu. which Lauren knows Erykah Badu. She's brought up her songs a couple of times with me. Erykah Badu, dumbfounded after testing positive for coronavirus in left nostril and negative in the right nostril. Let me tell you something, Sean. I have a colleague of a family member. Both of them are teachers. Was just tested positive in her nose and tested negative in her mouth. And everybody I know is starting to ask, what the hell is going on here? The nurses at the hospital, when Lauren and I went to the hospital to welcome our daughter into the world, the nurses at the hospital, these are OG nurses in Connecticut, Cobalt Blue, Connecticut, who delivered our daughter, were expressing unsolicited skepticism, not only about the virus, but the testing as well. And all the while, lockdowns are being extended, as well as this trauma programming for children. Not only are kids still learning remotely in isolation over the internet, but many of their teachers who are alone in their own apartments or houses are still wearing face shields and masks just to keep the appearances up. I know adults that are having the same experiences with doctors that they're having teleconferences with. There's nobody on one side of the computer, there's nobody on the other side, but everybody is still wearing masks for appearances, even though they are connected through webcam. What the hell what have you been processing as far as what's going on once again with the trauma programming and the virus, how it's changed everything? It's the reason for changing everything in the first place.
First of all, regarding the quote-unquote virus, I went from saying, okay, maybe this is real, maybe this is a biological weapon. And then I went to, and now I'm at the point where I'm just like, you know what? I don't even think this is a real thing. I mean, it just got to the point where I just don't think it can be. Regarding the trauma, one particular day, my nephew comes down the stairs, and he's got a cloth mask in his hand. And this was the part of the week on, week off instruction that they were receiving from their school and their teacher, where they were having about a half-hour-long Google Meets video chat with half a dozen of their students and their teacher. And he comes down, and he's got a cloth mask in his hand. We're inside the house. And he says, and I looked at him, and I said, what's the mask for? And he said, our teacher wants us to wear it for our Google Meet this afternoon. And I said, no. And he goes, well, I'm just going to show her that I have it, because she wanted us to have it, and she wanted us to wear it during the Google Meet so that we can start getting used to what it'll be like to go back to school and learning with the mask on.
Wow.
And I went, no. And then I went and got his parents when he was still downstairs with his sister. And I said, okay, here's what's going on. They're telling me that their teacher is making them wear a mask over Google Meets, that when they go back to school every other week, they're going to be doing random and mandatory at-the-door temperature checks across their foreheads. I said, you can't allow this. And my sister-in-law immediately started texting the school nurse, who she knows and is a client of, and she ended up texting her back and saying, yeah, teachers shouldn't be doing that. We're not doing mandatory or even randomized temperature checks. They are going to have to wear a mask when they go back to school, but it just blew me away that a teacher would actually think that was okay. And I know that there are teachers out there that know that this is absurd. I'm well aware of that, but to see that firsthand, definitely not an accident. I was driving around with my nephew, too, and I asked him about gym class. I said, so how's gym class? And he lets out this huge sigh, and he leans back in the chair, and he says, we've got to wear masks. And he said, we have to wear masks the whole time, and we have to do 4 laps around the gymnasium. We have to wear a mask while we're doing jumping jacks, while we're doing sit-ups, and the only time we can take it off is when we get a drink of water or we're standing outside by a fence in what's considered like the designated area for no mask wearing.
You know what they're going to do? They're going to make half the student body sick just from making them take laps with a mask on, and then they'll say that the whole student body has COVID.
That's what I said to him. I said, so how many of your fellow classmates have passed out? And I had a big smile on my face, and he looked at me and he paused and he said, no one's passed out, but there's a lot of wheezing. And I, and I just started laughing because I thought, yeah, they're going to kill a kid.
Jeez.
And I mean, who knows if it hasn't already happened? It's not like we're hearing the truth on the old TV anyway, but my God.
I mean, this is, Sean, I mean, I knew I know that you when you were talking last time you were on a couple of months ago, you're talking about, this is an endeavor you were really looking forward to because it really is almost like you were going back into the belly of the beast, and the insights that you've taken away from all this, man. So I mean, when it comes to homeschooling now, what do you, I guess the real solution is not people learning remotely. It's being whether or not people can actually detach themselves from the school system and do things on their own, because it really is just the curriculum follows you wherever you go.
Correct. You have to have organized content, subject by subject, in a linear fashion. It has to be run on some kind of a timeline. For example, one particular day, my nephew's watching this video about a guy who has a giant pine cone. The next day, he's learning about Mount Everest. Now, no one's going to be able to explain to me the connection between those two things. And they were both for the exact same class. So the lack of organization that I've seen is beyond telling.
I'm sorry, Sean, that kind of made me laugh a little bit, because you think about one day you're talking about a giant pine cone, the next day it's Everest. It kind of sounds like the way I write the show. Every night something different. Oh, keep going.
That's how I think sometimes too. But when you're watching a little kid do it, there's no way that a kid is being able to make the appropriate connections necessary. I mean, I gave them both a copy of the Constitution. When Amy Coney Barrett was testifying, I ran through them what this means. We went through the three branches of government. They hadn't even been taught the three branches of government. I mean, again, my nephew's in fourth grade. You would think that by then they'd at least get it. A little bit of Ohio history, a little bit of whatever. But I just feel like sometimes these educators are just passing these things off to the next grade level instead of just saying, all right, look, we can cover this here and now, and maybe we shouldn't have a company dictate what it is that we're teaching. But the fact is that it's just too corporatized, and they have to use this content that's prearranged and preordained for them to use. And if they don't use it, we all know what happens to that teacher. They end up losing their job. I will say this too, and again, this is rather horrific, but the local newspaper here has decided to take the homeschooling into their own hands, and they've decided to have what's called Learning at Home. And it's a daily article or an assignment that they encourage students to do. And I shit you not, one of the assignments, which I did a podcast on briefly as I was reading through it for the very first time, it has students put a mask on in their home, and then it explains to them how they can tell whether or not someone else who's wearing a mask is smiling or frowning.
Oh, God.
And then they want the student to go into the bathroom and look in the mirror and smile and frown, and see if they can tell the difference in their facial muscles and facial expressions as to whether or not they're smiling or frowning, and to practice this so that they can recognize it with other people. And then they wanted them to get online and look up pictures of people wearing masks and then decide whether or not they were smiling or frowning. And then they wanted them to write the editor about what they had discovered.
Sean, I was starting to think for a moment there, but then I know I should know to trust the way that this show works in the grand scheme of things. That I was starting to think that there was going to be no real connection between, but then again there is, just because of the reason why people are talking about the global reset. And of course, that is the pandemic that they have pushed on us very conveniently at the same all at once, when all the other tricks had exhausted themselves. But, I'm going in the second half, I'm going to read a little bit into what Klaus Schwab was talking about with the Great Reset, and how there should be an openness to biological enhancements, the way we should open up new biological realities for ourselves, transhumanism, the vaccines, the chips, everything else like that. And I'm starting to wonder, was there anything else? You knew that they were taking away humanity with the way that we were reducing our identities, covering our faces, cowering, living like hermits in our houses and in our apartments, and so many stupid people. There's a couple on Periscope right now that think that this is all a great idea for the greater good. They're very stupid, half-witted kind of people that really soak this on up. Don't understand that what we're really doing is we're giving up humanity. I mean, to be able to look at a human face and to assess and become familiar with human faces is so essential to life. They don't understand it. Nobody really gets it. And it's probably because all nuance and all real education about ourselves and about how we fit in and plug into the greater environment in the world at large has been taken out of what we call education here at home. We only have a couple of moments left. Can you give us some final thoughts on that and also let people know how to find your podcast?
I would just encourage people. I mean, I'm just saddened to see how many educators just don't say no. They apparently don't have a problem wearing the same color T-shirts and standing in picket lines and screaming at the top of their lungs for their union. But my God, I mean, just say no. Just say no to this kind of stuff. Say no to the mask wearing. Say no to the distancing. And just start saying no and say it collectively to these administrators and these school boards, because they're being bombarded with emails. And I bombard them with emails, too, anonymously. I do it all the time. But I don't do it in an impolite way. I do it in a very educational way. And I say, you need to get back to school, and you need to cut the shit with this mask wearing and everything else, because it's out of hand. You're abusing children. And as I've said on the podcast, too, if this happened back in January, where students just randomly walked into one of their teacher's classes and the teacher said, all right, I want everybody to sit 6 feet apart and wear a mask, that teacher would get fired. They'd be fired. They'd lose their certification because they would think that they were crazy. Well, now apparently everybody's crazy and it's okay. So it's interesting that it's just awful. But regarding the podcast, I'll say this. First of all, the last time I was on your show, you were kind enough to mention the Storm series that I'm building on a day in and day out basis of online posts, news events, and everything that's been happening politically. This morning, Amazon wouldn't publish Volume 9, and Volume 9, ironically enough, covers Election Day. So what I decided to do, even though I'm still kind of battling with them about that, I decided to take the PDF and make it for free. So if people want to know what was going on from October 31st all the way through November 15th, the free PDF of the storm is on AmericanEducationFM.com for free PDF download. And it'll be free for a few days until maybe Saturday. So, again, download that, email it around, send it to countless people if you want. Go for it. It's certainly an interesting read and yeah, and, I mean, it's a historic archive. Fortunately, still, the paperbacks are still available. Don't know how long that's going to last, but they're still there. My email is AmericanEducationFM@protonmail.com. Again, all the information for the podcast is on the website. And if anybody wants to email me, they can be a guest on the podcast because, again, we got to get these stories out about what's going on in schools and what people are observing, both parents, students, teachers, and even citizens who aren't directly affiliated with the education system.
Well, Sean, I'm like I said, I will be subscribing. I don't have any education-based podcasts that I listen to. This will be a much-needed area filled with, I know, a voice that I trust, and I think you have gained the trust of a lot of people that watch this show over the last year or two, and it's been wonderful to have you on. Keep fighting the good fight, and I can't wait to have you back.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate it. And again, my best to Tracy and her family.
Yes, thank you. I'll pass that along if she calls in. I hope she does. But thank you so much.
Yep, take care.
All right, be well. Dr. Sean Brooks, Ph.D., ladies and gentlemen. He does very well in summing up what we were really up against right now in that respect, because it's just something that you don't see every day. Especially if you're years removed from the school system, you just assume it's bad because you see the people who are in control of academia, who are in control of the culture and the storytelling in Hollywood, how the media dictates, and it's a big echo chamber, a big unending feedback loop between those three.